When I gave birth in 1970, we didn't make birth plans. There were absolutely no choices. We learned skills, which meant that obstetricians and in the United States, labor and delivery nurses or midwives who attended millions and millions of births in the 60s and 70s saw us not suffering. Skills weren't always great, but they were better than nothing. So when the birth plans came in, it was because the natural birth movement, and I'm going to sound like I'm really against the natural birth movement. I'm and I'm not. Where I'm against it is that we represent in our New Zealand NGO and all the mothers and fathers who develop Birthing Better, 100% of pregnant women who will give birth. So in some ways we're against the natural birth movement because it has excluded so many of us from having empowered births and put so much focus on the outcome rather than the process. So that has always made me irritable, even in the early 1970s when I used Lamaze in my birth and I was both induced and my labor was augmented and my contractions were very intense. I remember calling the teacher afterwards and saying the Lamaze skills didn't work. And her quirk to me was they don't work in inductions. And I just thought in my head is, how can you have birth skills that don't work in all births? What kind of nuts is that? But I didn't get involved in birth because of that. I just thought that was crazy. But when I did get involved in birth 2 years later and started to work with families to develop these skills, it was for all births. So the natural birth movement, and there's a video in this course that explains how we got here, how you got here. I'm not against the natural birth movement in that many positive changes have occurred. And that's because a dedicated group of very loud women, mostly, have always stood up for empowerment in birth. But that empowerment, and there is a but in this, has always been focused on outcome, this natural birth with no medical interventions, and if possible with a pain-free labor. And when the skills didn't produce that, and there's another video that explains it, they then disclaim skills. Famous authors, whether it's Michelle O'Donnell or Ina May Gaskin, or any famous author, Sheila Kissinger, they all tell you that birth is natural. Women just need to be left alone. Midwives need to sit in a corner and knit. And women should just discover birth, or any way that a woman sounds is perfectly fine. Women shouldn't be told what to do. That women know the best positions to get into. And that has always been hogwash from the start. For instance, positions. If women are having progressive labors and it gets more intense, the contraction gets shorter, closer together, and more intense, and they do not have skills to cope with it, they get into positions to back off the labor. They don't get into positions to get the labor over with quicker. And so we have to get real as women to each other. I grew up in a generation where we were told to do Kegel or pelvic floor exercises in order to develop strong muscles to push a baby out. And today, my child's 50 years old. Today, we're still telling that to each other. Tighten up down there. Does it hinder or help an object this big come through us? We don't need tight muscles down there. We need soft and pliable muscles down there. So when you are confronted with a birth plan and you make a list of all the things you do and do not want, first of all, birth professionals are not mandated by their training to give you as a consumer what you want. You as a consumer are using their service. So you need to understand that they do not need to provide you with a space to do anything or to do anything. You are going into their space of expertise. And that's, if you don't want to, don't go there. So, but if you don't want things like inductions or augmentations or membranes broken or no pain relief, all of these are interventions. If you don't want vaginal exams, if you don't want the assessments, the monitoring and procedures that theoretically in the evidence-based practice of the day are there to safeguard your health and well-being, if you don't want those things, then you need to create a skills-based birth plan that tells your care providers what you're going to do, not what you want, but what you're going to do in order to have your labor move along. It's as simple as that. There are two parts of birth that we discussed: women's suffering, which is massively big, and issues or risks that become problems, which actually is much tinier. So when you cope and manage, they see you. And when they see you coping and manage and you have high risks, such as a breech birth, they are more likely to negotiate with you. If you're looking like you're suffering, they want to save you. And so does your partner. They don't want to see you for hours and hours moaning and groaning and screaming and wet and white and red and tired and exhausted. They want birth to happen. So you need to make a second birth plan. And there's a PDF in this lesson that it shows you exactly how. They have been very important to us, and particularly to have your care providers write down in your notes from 24 weeks onward what skills you're learning. They don't need to learn the skills with you, but anybody can refer to them. And then if they see you in birth, you and your partner working well together, they will praise you. They love it. They wished 8 out of 10 of their clients had skills rather than 1 out of 10. Back in my generation, 1970s, we produced the 8 out of 10. They saw everybody being skilled to some level, and some level is quite good enough, really, to tell you the truth. And if you don't look like you're coping, they can refer back and say, well, you learned breathing. Well, I said I did, but I didn't. Yup, that happens a lot. So make certain that you take these skills into you, you commit to using them, and that you wow your birth professionals, and you as a family, a couple, friends or relatives ever working together, really work together in a team. So make 2 birth plans.